This episode is brought to you by KPMG. Making an impact is how KPMG helps make the difference. KPMG applies advanced tools and strategic thinking to convert data into actionable knowledge and deliver value by improving performance through transformation, modernizing processes with technology, harnessing the power of data, navigating complex M&A transactions, and enhancing trust among stakeholders. Go to kpmg.us/advisory to learn more. KPMG. Make the difference.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. Between two-factor authentication, strong passwords, and a VPN, you try to be in control of how your info is protected. But many other places also have it, and they might not be as careful. That's why LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points a second for threats. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast for 40% off. Terms apply.
It's the Joe Concha Tunnel to Towers Foundation Sunday morning show. Now, here's Joe Concha.
Welcome back, everybody. Let's bring in our second VIP guest of the hour. That, of course, is Ari Fleischer, former White House press secretary to George W. Bush and a Fox News contributor, and, like me, a student of media. Ari, how are you today?
Well, I hate to be a student of media. I don't know if I fail them or if I fail.
I think they failed us. I'm pretty sure of that. Somebody wrote a book about media snobbery. Yeah, I believe that was Ari Fleischer. And just those books write themselves, basically. But, Ari, before we begin, I have to get to a very pressing issue. And that is, how are your Dolphins 0-3?
You had to bring that up.
Well, I'm a Bears fan, and it's not looking good for us either. So join the winless club. But, I just don't get it. They have all that talent. They got Waddle, and they got Hill, and they got Tua, and it's, they're losing some close games. I guess it's the bottom line. But let's move on before the pain gets any worse for both of us. So obviously, I'd like to talk about Charlie Kirk, and this horrible assassination attempt, which feels like it was a month ago, given all of the media coverage and nonstop coverage, and many of it just so, as you said, disappointing from our media. They let us down. What's the most egregious thing that you've seen as far as what the facts are and what the reality is in terms of what media is pushing as a false narrative? I'll offer up mine first just to get the conversation started. When Brian Stelter talks about how, this is censorship and, he's pro-free speech and pro-free press, this is the same guy that called cable companies just a couple of years ago, cable operators, asking how they could keep Fox News on the air, considering that we're pushing hate speech and misinformation. Like, not try to get one person off the air from Fox, one host, the whole network. So I just find the hypocrisy rich coming from the media and Democrats, considering that under Joe Biden, there was the government disinformation board or the Ministry of Truth. I just feel like they're purposely ignoring that little fact that they supported censorship just a couple of years ago. And by the way, Jimmy Kimmel being off the air is not censorship. I think it's a free market issue.
I go in a different direction on this. I go right to whenever there is big breaking news of a political bent, the media's reaction is to go, Democrats are essentially the good people here and Republicans are the bad people.
Right.
You saw that from the moment Charlie was murdered, and it emerged that his family were Republicans. Much of the media, much of the Democrat punditry started to leap on that because they knew the implications if the killer was of the left. So they instantly tried to paint the picture. He came from a Republican family, white, Utah, Republican family, having nothing to do with the shooter, but that's his mother and his father. And that was the original breaking news, the sense of which way this was going to go if you read the media. And I see it on constant stories. If this had been the other way around, and if a leading liberal had been assassinated, the media instantly would have gone into overdrive about Trump, MAGA, right wing. It's just their instincts. Their instincts are to protect the left and go after the right. Every story.
It's so true because it's a reflex almost. Like we saw after Charlie was shot, and we didn't even know whether he was alive or dead. Matthew Dowd, for example, who was with ABC News for a very long time. Obviously,
that's right.
Did you work with him in the Bush administration?
Sure. Yeah,
sure.
Matt worked on the 2000 campaign. I don't know what happened to him.
Okay, so you knew him at least. That's 25 years ago, mind
Sure.
you. Do you think, to a certain extent, that Matthew Dowd, as you said, you work with him, reasonable guy, helped get George W. Bush elected, and then goes to, well, after Charlie was shot, that, hateful words result in hateful actions, basically saying that Charlie deserved it because, again, I don't know what was hateful about Charlie Kirk's rhetoric, quite frankly. He probably reached across the aisle more than anybody I ever knew as far as debating people that disagreed with him and did it with a smile on his face, so I'm not sure where the hate came from. But to do that before we even knew, again, Charlie's condition, I just was floored by that. And now, instead of apologizing for it, we're like, hey, because we've all done live TV thousands of times, and you can say something that you regret once in a while. But he doubles down on Substack and said, the right-wing mob came for me. I think, do you think it's performative to a certain extent? Because that's what gets him on TV. In other words, if he's a reasonable former Bushy and a Republican, that doesn't get you on MSNBC and get you a contract with that network, or maybe it doesn't get you on the Bulwark, podcast. I think sometimes these guys are doing this because that's what keeps them in business and relevant.
It goes back to what I said at the beginning of this, Joe. This is their reflex. This is their instinct. Their instinct is to immediately, regardless of the news, protect the Democrats, go after the Republicans. And what I've also come to the conclusion, and this is a happy conclusion, that you and I, everybody knows how biased the media is. But I think now it's all backfiring. The Democrats and the liberals have a few safe havens left because they're losing the country. They're especially losing people doing the postgraduate degrees, college degrees, the rest of the country. So when the media, academia, doubles down on these issues, they rally to themselves. They rally in a narrow-minded, left-wing cul-de-sac, where all they do is drive around in circles, protecting each other, talking to each other, protecting themselves, but forgetting that most of America doesn't live on that cul-de-sac. So they speak that same language. That's why campuses, faculty are so crazy liberal. They say these things, and then their friends, their coworkers, pat them on the back and say, that was great. The more outrageous, the more woke, the more left, the more anti-Trump, the more Trump's a fascist, Trump's a Nazi. They pat each other on the back, and they don't realize that most of America wants nothing to do with that cul-de-sac, and they're losing the country. That's the backfire. So they've got their safe havens, and MSNBC is certainly the capital of their safe haven, but they've lost the country.
I wish we didn't work for the same network because I would totally steal cul-de-sac and make it my own. But now, attribution. Ari Fleischer calls it a cul-de-sac. But yeah, that's a great analogy. And we're talking to Ari Fleischer, Fox News contributor, former press secretary to George W. Bush. Yeah, that's the thing. They all talk to each other. And I see it now. The mask has come off, right? When you look at all these people that considered themselves to be serious journalists that were holding truth to power, and then you see them on Substack or doing these podcasts from their kitchens, they've decided now, oh, wow, I don't have to pretend kind of to be in the middle anymore to be objective. That includes Don Lemon, John Harwood, who was a White House correspondent for two networks, right? Jim Acosta, who, such a big deal. I stand with Jim whenever he would take over a press conference to make it about himself. Chris Cillizza, Chuck Todd, Joy Reid, Tiffany Cross, Terry Moran, Jen Rubin, the conservative over at the Washington Post, Glenn Kessler, who apparently was a fact checker, who knew, Taylor Lorenz, and now Stephen Colbert and Jimmy Kimmel. But that's what they do. They go on these podcasts now, and they have each other on as guests, and it's probably the most boring thing I've ever seen because it's all one big echo chamber. But
that's right.
I think you're right, though. I think there is a correction here because all those people are now ex-cable news pundits or ex-columnists. It seems that, that the market is speaking once again and saying the ratings aren't there, the readership's not there, and we have to take out the trash. And that's the only way I could describe the journalism that these folks did over the last 2 or 3 decades.
Yeah, Donald Trump ushered this era in, but this era began prior to Trump. The media breakdown began prior to him, and it's only accelerated under Trump. But it's the hatred. It's the hatred that has got the media caught up in the problem. And hatred is never good for anybody, for any reason, for anything. And they so hate Donald Trump. It's why they call him a Nazi. It's why they call him a fascist. It's why they're just instantly blame Republicans and rally around to protect Democrats because they believe anything that advantages Trump has to be horrible for America. And that's where they're just on an isolated island. Trump won. He's the legitimate president. He deserves to have fair, neutral coverage. He doesn't get it, but thank goodness we're in a different era than we were when I was press secretary. When I was press secretary, the major media, New York Times, Washington Post, ABC, NBC, CBS, they mattered. We had to pay attention to them because there was no alternative. There was no social media yet. There was no conservative media outlets yet. The world has changed, and it's changed for the better from a conservative media point of view, because we now can talk to the American people without going through the filter of the left wing. And that filter was a rotten, terrible filter if you were a Republican. It was every day at work was an uphill fight because everybody was against us. And you look at the briefing rooms. When Obama was president, that briefing room was the easiest place to be for a press secretary. If you work for Trump, if you work for Bush, it's always been uphill. But it's changed now because of the advent of conservative media, because of the technological changes that allow us to get our news from different places, and because the American people have voted with their clickers, and they're not watching CNN and MSNBC as much anymore. Their ratings are way down. These late-night comedy shows. You know, Joe, I always got a kick out of the fact CNN would begin a lot of its morning shows on Monday talking about what Saturday Night Live talked about on Saturday night, as if anybody cared. But to the liberals who put on the news, what Saturday Night Live on Saturday said was news on Monday morning. That's how out of touch they are with the American people.
Yeah, last check, Saturday Night Live is not exactly down the middle. They kind of used to be, right? I mean, or at least it was a place where
ago when Steve Martin was on it.
Yeah, Steve Martin or Dana Carvey always comes to mind because he did such a perfect imitation of George H.W. Bush, but it wasn't hateful, and it was right. So embraced. It was embraced by the White House, quite frankly, because they had Carvey to the White House to perform as George H.W. Bush during a press conference.
Hateful. You just put the right words on it, and now the media is too hateful. And look at Jimmy Kimmel; he's hateful.
Yeah.
The things he does, the things he says, and so that's true about almost all those late night comedians. And they never gave Greg Gutfeld, who has the late night show on Fox News, the comedy show, the credit he deserved for being the most popular comedian on TV.
Yeah, he's number one right now. He doubled Kimmel on most nights. And Greg has probably, 1/20th the staff as far as resources. and that's the thing when I talk about free market. When you lose millions of dollars for your network, in other words, all right, so supply and demand, this is Econ 101. Supply is what Kimmel was providing on a nightly basis. So, for example, when Mike Pence got the COVID-19 shot, this is what he said. He said, quote, "So maybe save that dose for someone else. The only cure Mike Pence should get right now is a bottle of Clorox and a heat lamp." In other words, die, okay? Yeah. Or right. He even said vaccinated people having a heart attack, yes, come right into the hospital. Unvaccinated guy, rest in peace. That's screwed up stuff. I mean, where's the joke? Can somebody tell me where the joke is? So the supply is toxic, and then the demand, to your point around ratings, Kimmel barely got more than got more than 1 million viewers watching him per night. Carson used to get easily over 10 million, without blinking. And I guess it's a different media landscape now, but that's telling. And if you're Disney, you're Bob Iger, you're ABC, you're the affiliates like Sinclair and Nexstar, why would you continue to support this guy you're paying $16 million a year for, who's losing you tens of millions of dollars, and he's hurting your brand? I keep hearing that this is a free speech thing. Honestly, the numbers are the numbers, and that's why he will no longer have a show.
That's right, Joe. These things, for media, for pundits, we always want a yes or no. Was it because of the FCC chairman spoke out? Yes or no? These things are almost always complicated business judgments that leaders have to make, particularly about who gets these rarefied slots on TV.
Ari, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it, and I'll see you in a green room hopefully soon over at Fox.
Thanks, Joe. Good to talk.
It's the Joe Concha Tunnel to Towers Foundation Sunday Morning Show.